Hello, this is Jeff Segor. This is the first in a series of programming videos to create web-based applications using a set of free web tools. These videos are organized in a series of opuses, this one being opus 1, number 1. The number scheme is going to be the videos and opus is going to be the project. So let's get started. Each web application is broken into two parts, a front end and a back end. The front end is visible to your browser and contains much of the user interface widgets you see on a website. Angular is a framework we shall install to control the front end. The back end part resides on the server and is written in JavaScript using a tool called NodeJS. The server code has the responsibility of accessing the database, providing security for some of the data, control authorization, and authentication for the data. For example, when you sign on with password or when you try to access certain types of data. It also contains all the endpoints which are accessed by the browser's URL addresses. The URL is a web address, by the way, and we'll talk about endpoints a little bit later. But these are the components that make up a web application. This particular one is going to be a recipe manager. A few months ago, I got a Instant Pot and found it was really fun to start, cooking with the various YouTube-based recipes out there. So I thought it'd be good to, since I started to modify some of the existing recipes, and then when I went out shopping, I had to kind of remember all the different ingredients. I thought it would be good if I can automate this process. So these are the components. This is going to be primarily JavaScript all the way through. And the Angular itself is code that is visible on the browser side. It is a framework, and it makes writing JavaScript code much easier. In fact, it uses a different language, a slightly different language than JavaScript called TypeScript, which is a little bit more strict as far as a programming language. JavaScript is very, very loose and easy to make a lot of mistakes with. Node.js is also written in JavaScript, but it's code that resides on the back end being the server. And the server, you can think of it as just running from a command line of process. And we'll see how that looks. Elasticsearch is going to be my backend database. And it's not a relational database. It's what's called a NoSQL database, which has its own query language. It's free if you use it, for just smaller type applications, but very sophisticated. I think Twitter might at one time have used it. Not sure. They still are. Kibana is another tool that you can download with along with Elasticsearch, which allows you to manage the Elasticsearch database. So you can create documents, what they call documents, which are similar to records in a relational database. Create indexes. Index essentially is kind of a schema for documents. And a document is actually an instance of a record. So npm is a module manager, and in this there's many third-party tools out there that I use that make it easier to create good-looking GUIs. I'll be using Bootstrap. jQuery is an old framework that you use for JavaScript to make things a little bit easier. I don't use it very much, but there are some commands in there that I kind of like. Express is going to be a module that gets installed on the server side, and that basically controls your URL addresses that are sent. These are kind of requests that are sent from the browser itself to access data. And then the Elasticsearch client is an additional module that interfaces This is also at the server side, the database. If you happen to hear something that sounds like the sea in the background, that's probably because my laptop's fan sort of kicks in quite often in this hot house. So the prerequisites, I assume quite a bit of knowledge in certain things, and other things I'm going to do basically from scratch. I assume that you know JavaScript, even though we're going to be actually using TypeScript instead of JavaScript. For most of the programming on the server side, it's going to be pure JavaScript. I'm going to be using a source code editor called Visual Studio Code, put out by Microsoft. Really, really nice. Very, very nice to use. You can actually step through code with it, both on the back end and the front end. And it's very, very powerful, and it's free. JSON and JavaScript object format familiarity. JSON is used all over the place. It's used for configuration. It's essentially a text file. It's sort of the successor to XML. It's used to store records. So all these recipes will be stored in JSON format on Elasticsearch. Some acquaintance with Angular, but you don't really have to. It would be helpful if you had some knowledge, but it's not essential. The concepts of source control, we will be, as we start creating this thing, I will be storing this in what's called Git, and I'm going to publish that up on a site called GitHub and make that public. Basic knowledge of NPM as far as going to the website and seeing how you can install knowledge. I'll go through this to some degree. And the idea of an API is the ability to for a program to access functionality from another program outside itself. A good example is, let's say I wanted to access my Google Calendar. Google provides a bunch of APIs to access all their little widgets. So let's say I wanted to pull out information from my calendar programmatically. There would be an API that Google supplies that you would access it. APIs used all over the place. The one that we're going to be using here from the browser, the front end talking to the back end, is I'm going to be using what's called REST API. Using some HTTP calls. Yeah, I didn't put that on here, but a little bit of knowledge of HTTP would be helpful. And as far as debugging, basic knowledge of how you would debug some code, I'll go through that. And these will be the various things that need to be installed first. And the very, very first thing will be NodeJS. Once again, NodeJS is code that is used to create a server. If you go to this website here, and this is the version that I'm using right now, the latest one. They have a Windows version and a Mac version. Install it. I'm not going to go through that. It's already installed on my computer. It's pretty straightforward. It will automatically install NPM as well. So you'll be able to install a lot of the other modules, including Angular. Visual Studio Code, go to this website. I'm using Windows for this demo, and but there's also a Mac version of it. Download it, and also the Git website. This is this is the place where you would get Git, and you would install basically. There's two pieces of it. One is more of a GUI interface, and the other is a command line interface. I'll be using both of those. It's sometimes easier to see the whole string. We'll get into this a lot in a bit more detail later in another video, but we will be using this. GitHub would be the place where you would basically push the code changes, so it's on a different site and other people can use it. We will be doing that. Doesn't exist right now, but as we create it, I'll show how to push it up there. So the very first thing to do after we've installed npm itself, npm should be available. So let me bring up a command line. Now we're going to install Angular globally rather than to the local project. So that's the -g command that we have here. I've already installed Angular. So if I was going to install, say, a newer version, I would go through npm. Now you can see the npm is on this computer. So if I do this, it'll tell me, yeah, I've got version 8.11. So let's, just to be a little bit clean about it, let's say I wanted to uninstall my old Angular. And if ng is the command that you would use to create projects and so forth. If I do ng version, it does not recognize it. So we install the latest version. CLI stands for command line interface. Command line is what you see right now. You open up a terminal window, in this case DOS. So this installed 25 packages. If we do ng version, we should see the version of Angular. And it's up to 14 now. Now this gives us the ability to start creating our first app. And again, this is, in this project, you'll see both the server and the front end the front end part together in the same directory, but they will be separated. So the user from the browser won't have access directly. He's got to go indirectly to the server side. And what's cool about this approach is I can create a server in my local Wi-Fi, and I can access it. If I've got the Wi-Fi set up, I can access it from my phone or my iPad. So this we're not going to go into yet until we create our first project, but I want to quickly move to just the kind of the definition of this application that we're creating. So what I want to do, my goal here is to have a web page where I have a list of recipes, and I want the ability to, I also want to have a page there that has all the stuff that I have in stock, like, for example, spices and whatever I have on hand. I want to be able to create a shopping list based on, let's say I want to do a couple menus, a couple recipes. I can click on those and it will give me the list of ingredients. It'll cross-check it with what I've got in stock and then give me a shopping list that says, oh, this is what you need to buy. And I also want to drag and drop some items directly into the shopping list. And then I'm going to be using, this program is going to be using the front end using Angular, and the back end is going to be using Elasticsearch for the database. The communication between the two is going to use the REST API, which I'll define later. And I want the ability to, as I want to be able to add recipes. I want it to be stored in the database. And I also want to export everything in the database. So if I get a crash, I can restore it. I also want to be able to seed the database with some basic factory settings of menus. Right now I've started with about 9. Whenever you create a database, you create a data model, and there will be two what's called index in the Elasticsearch world. And in this case, I'm going to have an identifier, a unique identifier, a name of the recipe, meal type. There'll be a link to the original recipe if there exists one, some notes, and then there'll be a list of ingredients and then the steps. So it looks something. Oh, also I have another index for my inventory, which will be the category name and whether a Boolean, which is a true or false, and whether it's in stock or not. It looks something like this. This is kind of rough at this point, but the intention is that each recipe will be a card on here. Once I do these and get some images, I'll add it to this. Right now I've just been doing 2 of these recipes. I want to be able to have this header type menu here, so I can get to the recipe list, the accessories, what's in stock, and so forth. If I click on one of these, I want to be able to see my general notes here, the website where I got this recipe from. It could be modified, the list of ingredients, and the amount used, and so forth. So this is generally what it's going to look like. When I'm creating the shopping list, this is very rough, kind of dirty right now, but we'll clean it up. I want the ability to be able to drag, pick a category here and drag items to the shopping list, and then this will be automated a bit more when I select actual menus. I also want an inventory list of what I've got on hand. If it's checked, it's already in stock, and if it's not, and then this will be used in conjunction with the recipe, the shopping list. And then also I want some general information on some of the items I have on hand, some accessories, brand names, and etc. So that's kind of the goal. So we'll get started in the next video actually creating the project itself, the Angular project, and getting it all initialized. So until that time, happy computing.